Welcome to part 37 of my series of operations videos. This is your host, Burr Stewart, and today I'm just going to present some highlights from a recent operating session that took place to honor and host members of the Friends of the Burlington Northern Railroad here in the Seattle region for their annual convention. The model railroad operating session took about 4 hours, so I'm going to condense it down to less than 15 minutes just to show you a few highlights. First, let's look at an overview of the layout taken from a GoPro camera in one of my basement windows. This shows the main peninsula, with Brian Elchlip being the Bayside yardmaster, and you can see a grain train moving into Bayside Yard there with the blue caboose on it. Keep an eye on that blue caboose because you'll see it in some of the closer pictures coming up. As you can see, I sped up the video so you wouldn't have to watch it in real time, but the actual pace of the operation is pretty mild and not too hyper. Of course, when you speed it up like this, it looks pretty intense. But everyone had a good time and managed to figure out what trains they were supposed to be putting together and where to take them. So with that overview, we can look at some of the footage I was able to take of a few of the trains that ran that day. This is the unit grain train heading north from Seattle to Everett on its way back to the Midwest. This would be empties having been unloaded at the grain terminal in Seattle.
Unit grain train? Is this the unit grain train? And it's heading to Bayside? Okay. You actually do not have clearance to go to Bayside, but you do now.
You can hear there the dispatcher chewing out the operator of this train for having pulled out of Inner Bay without the proper clearance. But, you know, these things happen. No harm was done.
So where is this guy Comish?
And what a beautiful looking grain train it is. A few minutes later, our grain train pulls into Bayside Yard in Everett, opposing a train with an F unit at the front end. A few minutes after that, the train with the F unit on the front end pulls into Inner Bay. This is a long train, BN train number 137, which in the Great Northern days used to be called the GWS, which stood for Great Northern to Western Pacific to Santa Fe. It was a train that ran continuously from Vancouver, British Columbia, south to Stockton, California, or maybe Los Angeles for all I know. Meanwhile, the northbound version of that train is leaving Ballard, while the Skycomish local is arriving in Inner Bay and holding for clearance to enter the yard. These are beautifully detailed diesel locomotives that Brian Elchlip has remotored and redecodered and put in LEDs, and they're really spectacular. The Sky Local has a couple of GP18s on it, which are powerful enough to do the job. And as we pass by Emerson Street overpass, we can get a sense of why the Sky Local has to wait if they want to pull into the yard. This train needs to get out of the way first. Those ore hoppers are empties coming out of the Asarco smelter in Tacoma and heading back to mines in British Columbia for copper ore. In the background, Brian's describing how he rebuilt those locomotives.
You see the top, that's got a whole different long hood. That's the same thing with the 1422. I put a GP7 long hood on that one. And here's the Frisco unit with the nose punch.
The rear end of SWG now in the clear. The Sky Local is now cleared to move into the yard. As you probably know if you've been watching other videos on my channel, I'm on a bit of a campaign to teach myself and others to turn the bell off unless it's absolutely necessary, which I think is what prototype locomotive engineers do as well. There, that's better. A few minutes later, our northbound SWG, train number 140, is now heading across the Squid Bridge on its approach into Everett's Bayside Yard, headed up by a GP10 that Brian rebuilt. You've got to love this train. If you don't, you're probably not watching this video.
So Burr, if your wife took any pictures, or if you took any pictures of people, operating trains, send them to me.
Okay.
We put together a little photo montage. Wow, dual gauge. I just noticed that. That's a lot of work. Dual gauge switches.
Yeah. Is that hand laid?
I don't know.
That is one long train.
So Burr, how many hours a day do you spend down here?
Okay. Here's an accidental view of the floor, showing how I raced over to the other end of the room to photograph the train heading north to Burlington. Train 140 is now passing the Mount Vernon station and heading over the Skagit River Bridge. You can see there the two lead units separated because Brian hasn't changed to Katy couplers yet and is still using the cheap plastic couplers that come with the Athearn Genesis units. Well, Brian's GP30 was such a beautiful thing to look at. We just ran it around a little bit and I aimed my directional microphone on it just to let you hear what it sounds like. I took this video after everyone had left, so that's why you don't hear people in the background. I think those were turbocharged engines, and you can hear that thing spooling down. So go ahead and back it up. And spooling up. Ah, the world of the GP30. Very nice. Okay, for our last little bit of fun, we have a brass AKASO C415 that Brian rebuilt and painted and all that good stuff. And he's using it right now for switching in Bayside. So he's assembling a transfer train to run from Everett's Bayside Yard over to Seattle's Inner Bay Yard. And in a minute we'll have this train pull out and then you'll be able to watch it move along the main line to Inner Bay. It looks like all that's left is to go pick up that caboose. Two toots means we're going forward. This isn't a very long train, so there was no reason to put another engine on it. The AKASO C415s were purchased by the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad, which was one of the companies merged in to create the Burlington Northern in 1970. I'm always saying that this model railroad is set in 1973, but truthfully, there's some slop there. I don't know when they repainted that C415, and some of the locomotives we're running today were repainted from Frisco units after 1980. We're doing the best we can. But didn't we just see this Caboose X100 on an earlier video? I keep thinking that we need to renumber it to its Burlington Northern number, but somehow never get around to it. We did recently get around to adding some bushes to the sides of the hills here, which I think really improves the view, especially considering how rainy it is. Barreling along the seawall of Puget Sound, and forgetting to blow for the grade crossing. The Muckle TO team track. More seawall. Gratuitous horn honking. The Ballard Station. What should be bridge number 4 across the Lake Washington Ship Canal, but I left it on the lower deck as you see there. Oops. Dave Inger did a great job of covering that foreground hillside with scenery, don't you think? The Emerson Street overpass. What a great looking and unusual locomotive. And arriving at our final destination, which looks to be the A track in Seattle's Inner Bay Yard, named the Balmer Yard after former CEO. If you've enjoyed this video, you may want to consider joining the Friends of the Burlington Northern Railroad, FOBNR.org. It's a lot of fun and you'll learn a lot more about this railroad. FOBNR resources also follow the Montana Rail Link and the BNSF, which of course took over the BN about 25 years ago. Well, that brings us to the end of this summary of another operating session on the Burlington Northern Model Railroad, an HO scale railroad set in 1973 in the Seattle region. I hope you've enjoyed it and you'll join me in a number of other videos on my channel. For now, this is Burr Stewart wishing you much fun with trains.